As everyone is popping in, we just want to say welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. As you are all coming on and joining us for this session, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for being here. We're just going to give it a minute or two as others are joining in before we do our introduction of our speaker for today. But thank you once again for sharing this time with us and just taking a little opportunity to learn a little bit about free speech. In respect of your time, we'll just give it about 30 more seconds and then we're going to begin our session. All right, Jordan's on the waiting room. Perfect. Okay, so welcome and good afternoon. Happy Friday. Just a couple more hours and then you can begin your weekend. So I'll introduce myself, Dr. Takis Wiggin-Davis. I serve as the Assistant Vice President within the Division of Inclusive Excellence, and I am privileged to host this session with my co-chair of the Student Advocacy Advisory Team, Dr. Jordan Draper. We are on today as your mistress of ceremony in a sense, but we'll be helping with all background technology. If you have any questions or any concerns as we're going through this session, we ask that you go ahead and just drop it in the chat. We did not do it in a webinar form on today because it allows for more engagement throughout the presentation with our esteemed guests. But if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, we ask that you just drop it in the chat and Jordan and I will be paying attention to that. And we will make sure that all questions, comments, and concerns are addressed accordingly. So to begin this session, I want to take a moment to welcome our speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Sigal Ben-Porath received her doctorate in political philosophy from Tel Aviv University in 2000, after which she joined Princeton University Center for Human Values as a postdoctoral fellow. In 2004, she moved to the University of Pennsylvania, where she is currently a professor of education, philosophy, and political science. Her most recent book, In Free Speech on Campus, and her previous books include, Citizenship Under Fire, Democratic Education in Times of Conflict, and Tough Choices, both from Princeton University Press. She serves on the board of the Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy, as well as the Teachers Institute of Philadelphia. She has been chairing Penn's Committee on Open Expression since 2015. And I just want to touch upon that word open expression because this morning, as we were in our training, we fell in love with that term, which you're going to hear more about in just a second. So free speech has again become the focus of political and cultural forces impacting colleges and universities. Free inquiry is central to higher education's mission, and it is therefore a must that we ensure that a broad range of views and approaches are discussed openly. That is the lead in to our session today. So please enjoy. And once again, thank you. And we welcome our keynote, Dr. Ben-Porath.
Thank you so much, Takis, and thanks to you and to Jordan for inviting me to join your community again today. I really appreciated spending some time with your team, and I really appreciate the folks who are joining us this afternoon. I recognize that we have staff and faculty and students joining our conversation, and I'm excited to share some of my thoughts with you, and also, of course, to engage with you in conversation. I just want to say a couple of words as I'm sharing my screen with you. I started thinking about open expression on college campuses when I was chairing Penn's Committee on Open Expression a few years back. I am no longer in this role. I've finished my time served. And I really recognize that some of the perspectives on free speech have become polarized in a way that really make them ineffective for addressing the needs of universities and colleges. And so that's when I really started focusing my research on that. That's when I wrote the book, which I'm now showing you on the screen. About open expression on college campuses. And that's when I also started introducing some of my ideas about campus open expression on various colleges and universities. As you've heard from Takis, I'm a philosopher by training, but this work is really an effort to bridge my ideas about democratic theory and the role of open expression in protecting democracy, bridge those ideas which are abstract or philosophical with a very practical, on-the-ground approach to what colleges might do in order to protect open expression and inclusion on their campuses, because these two values are sometimes presented as opposing, or two values that we need to select between. And I want to try and show a way, again, both theoretical and practical, to navigate and balance the two of them and really incorporate the two of them on our college campuses. And so my plan for right now, and I really appreciate Takis and Jordan organizing this event in a more open format rather than webinar format. My plan is to share for about 20 minutes or so my views that I have, going through this PowerPoint, which is about, I think I have 18 slides, so about 20 minutes. And then to have a conversation with all of you. And as Takis mentioned, if you have questions or comments as I'm going through my presentation, please feel free to raise them as well. I'm happy to stop and address any concerns or questions as I go along. Okay, so the issue of free speech on college campuses has become, again, very polarized in recent years. These are photographs from different college campuses from the last 5 years or so, where we had protests and sit-ins and marches, where we had controversial speakers coming, sometimes managing to express their views, and sometimes really being interrupted or disrupted in their events for various reasons. And the concerns that some of you are facing on your campus are really shared both around the United States as well as globally. Why is this happening now? I want to offer just a few reasons as I understand them. First of all, our country is becoming increasingly polarized. What you see here is the distance between the median Republican and median Democratic voter. As you can see, the distance between them is increasing, And since 2017, of course, the distance is increasing even more. And so our perspectives are different and further away from each other. And even more pressingly, our view of each other is becoming increasingly polarized, a phenomenon that political scientists call affective polarization or polarization of emotion is becoming increasingly significant, where we are seeing people's views about the other party as increasingly negative, and people's trust in those who vote a different way than them increasingly is or is rapidly reduced in recent years. So people, for example, ascribe negative character traits or motivations to those who are members of the other party. And so we are an increasingly polarized country. Our colleges and universities are becoming increasingly diverse. And so this polarization, in as much as it is a part of our affiliation with different identity groups, is becoming more pressing. Over here, we are just seeing one example, which is racial and ethnic diversity. But of course, our colleges and universities are becoming more diverse in other ways too. For example, we have more people who are openly members of various LGBTQ groups. So we have more sexual and gender diversity, visible sexual and gender diversity on campus. We have more visibility for undocumented people. And so again, we have various forms of diversity on campus, which really puts greater pressure on the question of what are the boundaries of expression about these forms of diversity, right? So when we have diverse campuses, which are promising to be welcoming to diverse populations and members of different groups, can people still express bigoted, questioning, hateful, harmful views about members of these groups, which to which the answer in the general democratic context is yes. Yes, you are allowed to voice bigoted views, but on college campuses, can you really do that and maintain an inclusive environment? The more diverse we are, and the more visibly diverse we are in terms of the different types of minority groups that we have, religious groups, sexual, racial, etc., then the more pressure there is on welcoming these groups through managing the kind of speech that they are exposed to. More than all of that, we are seeing that free speech itself, and particularly campus free speech, is becoming in itself a matter of political struggle. And so there are increasing efforts, not in New Jersey at the moment, but in Pennsylvania, for example, and in all sorts of states around you, as you can see on this map, which is from a couple months ago, so it's already way out of date. There are efforts to legislate what public colleges and as well as public schools can really speak about, and an effort to limit the open conversation that we have about matters that are deemed as controversial. For example, racial equality, some aspects, painful aspects of the history of this country, gender and sexuality, diversity, etc. So all of these issues mean that we are becoming more polarized, also specifically about the topic of campus free speech. And this is also making our work in regards to maintaining our boundaries and the autonomy of our institutions in managing these concerns. This is becoming more and more challenging. Couple of points about kids these days, which people sometimes like to mistakenly present as snowflakes or coddled or overly sensitive or unwilling to listen to each other. Here is how I think about the students who are joining college campuses today. First of all, the vast majority of our population is living in what what the media depicts as landslide counties, meaning counties where there is a one major political perspective that is dominant in that area. And so most of the people who are arriving at 18 to our college campuses, or oftentimes not at 18, right, but who are starting college, they have lived in a neighborhood or a county where they really had a limited opportunity to encounter diverse political views, and oftentimes they had a limited opportunity to encounter diversity in other ways. In addition, students are coming to us from high schools where they were permissibly silenced, right? So in other words, the courts more and more are refusing to recognize the speech rights of people under 18, minors, people who are attending K-12 schools. And so in public schools, people do not have the opportunity to experience open discussion, open exchange of ideas, because their teachers and administrators can legitimately either silence them, censor them, or punish them for speech, including nonsensical speech, as my favorite guy over here is raising a banner that says "Bong hits for Jesus." He has no idea what that means, and nobody could really explain it in the court case that is nicknamed "Bong hits for Jesus." It's a Frederick versus Morris case, where this guy was expelled for 10 days from his public school in Juneau, Alaska, for raising this banner during a school event when they were welcoming the Olympic torch that was passing through their town. And he was expelled for 10 days for causing this kind of trouble and sued for his free speech rights. But the court has decided that he doesn't have those, that he can be punished even for such a generally, I think, innocuous and silly act, basically because of the mention of drug use that the court said was permissibly punishable. And so, in other words, young people today are coming from less diverse contexts and from contexts in which they really are not allowed or not invited to exchange their views openly. And then they arrive to college campuses, and basically we, faculty and administrators, are telling them, oh, welcome, here we have free speech, good luck and enjoy yourself. And I actually think this is a mistake that we are doing as institutions, because we really need to take on the commitment of clarifying to the young people that are joining our campus why free speech is important and how it might be best operationalized on our college campuses, how they can benefit from it, and how they can take part in it, which hopefully this conversation today is a part of this process. College campuses are basically continuing their ongoing mission of searching for knowledge. This is what higher education is for. And they are continuing their mission of educating students or disseminating knowledge. But as I said, they are doing this with a more diverse population, which is a blessing. And they are doing it with the more engaged students, politically engaged and socially engaged students, as we see from surveys of this younger generation, which is another blessing, and really requires us as institutions to think about the ways in which we build on these diverse and engaged populations that we are serving today as we continue our search for knowledge, which requires us, necessitates that we maintain an environment where people can question heterodoxy, where they can question sort of like what everyone knows or the common knowledge, because this is how we try to advance knowledge and we try to research and further our understanding, right? So we need an atmosphere of free inquiry, and we need to maintain it while we are educating diverse and engaged students and prepare them for their jobs and for their civic roles in society. All of these are the current missions of higher education institutions, and is part of the reason why open expression is continuously questioned right now by our students and by the public, because of these diverse demands on us in how we um, protect it and how we make it work for our campuses. Okay, so basically the framework that I want to offer for addressing some of these concerns. I have 2 slides that are really theoretical. This is the philosophy part. And then I'm gonna try to show you how it works in practice. So inclusive freedom is really the vision that I'm developing in my work, which is really trying to take into account both the importance of open expression and the importance of inclusion. This is a concept that is educational and relational, which means that this is not an effort to make a legal claim or to reinterpret the First Amendment, etc. It's really an effort to say, look, a lot of speech is protected in the United States. We know it's protected. Racism is protected. Bigotry is protected. A lot of harmful speech is protected. Even hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. What do we do now? How can we think educationally and relationally about an educational institution within the legal context of very broad boundaries for protected speech? I think our goal is really to figure out a way to expand and protect speech to the best extent that we can, meaning to make sure that various forms of expression, spoken expression, written expression, artistic expression, protests, right? So all sorts of expression are protected on our college campuses, and at the same time recognize that, free speech may be free, but somebody's paying for it, right? And so we have to recognize the burden that protected speech is placing on the shoulders of some members of our community, especially members of diverse minority groups, right? Different minority groups. So if it's a racism, then it's racial minority groups. So if it's bigotry against LGBTQ folks, so it's these minority groups. Sometimes it's religious bigotry or other forms of bigotry. Sometimes it's ideological exclusion. So we need to try and recognize who is carrying the burden of our protected speech, and we have to use our institutional power to lift some of these burden from their shoulders. So we have to create institutional practices and structures that allow for people who are harmed by protected speech to really not carry this burden by themselves, and especially to not be silenced by the speech of others. Creating an inclusive climate on campus means that we are ensuring that the vast diversity of people and views is not only just legally protected on our campus, but really in practice, that all these different people and views can be voiced and can be heard. And this is really something that requires a lot of hard work and coordination and communication across the different constituencies on campus, the administration, the staff, the faculty, the students, etc. It's a commitment that we all have to take. Okay, I have one more theoretical slide. Oh, here it goes. People talk about safe spaces, and at least they used to talk about snowflakes. I don't know if it's still popular, but people talk about safe spaces on college campuses as something that is ridiculous, right? As something that students are demanding. Oh, they just want safety. They are just looking to protect themselves from different views. And honestly, sometimes it's true. Sometimes we don't want to hear different views on our college campus or in our community. And again, because the young people have very limited experience in diversity of views and in open exchanges, then sometimes they really are not prepared for that. But I would like to talk about the necessity of intellectual risks, right? To mention that to take intellectual risks and to reconsider our beliefs and our views is really inherent to the kind of work that is happening on college campuses. If you thought that you already knew everything that you need to know, you wouldn't come to college, right? So taking intellectual risks, asking yourself whether what you believe to be correct and true is in fact so, is really inherent to the kind of work that is being done on college campuses, whether it's in the sciences or in the humanities, in all aspects of our work. Intellectual safety, therefore, really undermines our mission, right? So intellectual safety meaning, I know what I know, you can believe whatever you believe, I'm not listening, you know, everyone has their own truth. That's not how it works. We have to have an open exchange of ideas. At the same time, we have to do that without creating dignitary risks. In other words, if I'm asking questions that are pushing the intellectual boundaries, that are taking intellectual risks, but I'm doing it in a way or manner that really undermines somebody else's dignity, then I'm silencing their voice. I'm really rejecting them from my community. I'm undermining their dignity. And therefore, I'm actually harming them, but I'm also harming myself because I will not hear their views and I will not know their perspective. And really the conversation that we're having is going to be impoverished, right? And so dignitary safety really advances the search for knowledge. It allows us to have an open context for inquiry, an inclusive climate where everyone can participate in the conversation. And this is our goal. Our goal is to take intellectual risks in an environment that ensures dignitary safety for all. And this is really the hard work that we have to do, is to communicate to everyone that they are equal members of our community, that their voice is meaningful and important to us, and that we want to hear what they have to say. And together we can take intellectual risks, looking for knowledge. Okay, so this is basically the general framework. I want to offer a couple, let's see, how is my time? Okay, I will offer a couple of quick sketches about how it might work, just to give you a sense of the kind of practicality of it, and then we can have hopefully an exchange about those. So these matters take a different form in class, where really the biggest advantage and the biggest commitment that we need to have is to intellectual honesty and an open exchange. I have various recommendations that I'm happy to share, and sometimes I do workshops for faculty about how they can plan their lessons in order to anticipate various challenges to either instructors or students' open expression, and what are the limits of planning, especially when students sometimes raise controversial ideas in class, and how we might address them. Some people call for civility in class. I think that's not always useful, but I definitely think that we need to have in every classroom shared norms of exchange and conversation, so that people know what the expectations are and what the boundaries are. And we have, of course, to maintain an inclusive and open climate in class. What is really most important here is that in class, the key goal is the advancement of ideas, right? And this is really what should guide our efforts. And so intellectual diversity is really key to the exchange of ideas in class. Contrary to, or different from that, in outside of class, in clubs and groups and parties and events, everything that's happened on campus outside the boundaries of the classroom, we have to make sure that we maintain the autonomy of different groups that are hoping to express their opinions, take action. What you see here in the picture is probably a little bit on the far end of what is possible on a college campus. We need to educate our students and support them in acceptable modes of protest and activism, which I'm happy to talk about. We need to support student groups that want to be exclusive, for example, groups for women in engineering, or groups for LGBTQ folks, or groups for a religious affiliation, etc. So this is definitely something that's protected by freedom of association, is important for the sense of belonging and safety of students on campus. But at the same time, when we are looking to advance some kind of position, or we are looking sometimes to oppose an outside speaker or an uninvited speaker, as I'll show in a second, we need to build coalitions and work together. This is nicely illustrated here in a strong protest that was organized by our Black student organization on my campus, and with a coalition of various other members of student groups that were opposing a controversial, some say racist, speaker that was invited by another student group. The event took place inside the hall that you can see on the side of the picture here. And the protest was taking place outside, with some protesters also standing inside the room. And so basically just trying to illustrate here the effort to support our students when they are expressing their equality on our campus, and really putting our institutional power behind them while still permitting the controversial event to take place. We also have, like you do and many other campuses do, controversial street preachers or groups of loosely religiously affiliated speakers who are showing up on the open parts of our campus and voicing hateful views against different groups. In this case, you can see against LGBTQ members of our campus, but they speak against others, religious minorities and women broadly as well. This is a challenge that many campuses in the area and other places are facing. And basically what we are trying to do about that, given that these people are protected by the First Amendment and are permitted to express these forms of hatred on campus, even as we are limiting the members of our campus from expressing such views because we want to be an inclusive context, really some of the things that we can do in response is to call out hatred. We can call in members who are hurt by this group and try to create coalitions around our shared understanding of inclusion. We can protest in various ways. You can see our students in the picture at the bottom trying to raise signs that would either be funny or express different opinions, raise the rainbow flag, or sometimes play music or try to do something more positive around these unfortunate events. And of course, another thing is really just to not offer our attention to these groups, call off from where we stand our participation or our attention to events that we find to be hateful. So in summary, inclusive freedom on campus is asking about who and what can be included, who is responsible for the inclusion, and we need to really allocate responsibility for the inclusion both in class and on the broader campus. What recourse do people have when their expressive or dignitary needs are not addressed? And especially ensuring that the dialogue can continue, because a college campus is nothing if not a context for open dialogue. We have to make sure that we look for common grounds, starting by what we share, what we know, what we want to know. These are really the questions that should be leading a campus conversation, and this should be at the root of our practical responses to speech on the boundaries of expression. And with this, I will stop sharing my screen and I will invite you to speak up. If people are wanting to, I guess, put questions in the chat, or I don't know if Takis and Jordan have other protocols for that. I invite that. I'm, of course, happy to go through other examples or instances of speech on the boundary of permissible expression and how we might address them. But I really want to give everyone an opportunity to respond as well. So I'm going to take a pause and give you an opportunity to share your views.
And also pose any questions that may have been on your mind thus far. So if not a general response to the presentation just given, but you have a question in which you'd like to pose, definitely open to that as well. Jordan, you were about to say something.
Yeah, we got one in the chat, Dr. Ben-Porath. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about free speech versus disrespect and maybe kind of that boundary. I know that you started to touch on that, but that seems to be kind of a larger part of the conversation that we sometimes have on campus, especially when particular groups come to campus. And so if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Right. So I would say disrespect is surely a form of protected speech, right? So we cannot really limit expressions that are disrespectful or even uncivil, right? These are all forms of speech that are protected by, the First Amendment and other legal protections, but also what I think is really important to keep in mind is that norms around disrespect and civility really are quite varied across different communities, different cultures, different generations or age groups. And it's, if we try to impose our perspective regarding respect on others, we really are going to limit too much, right? And this is, so I'll get in a second to your specific comment about the street preachers or others who are showing up on campus, or sometimes the speakers who are coming in and expressing uncomfortable and disrespectful and sometimes harmful views. But I want to say more generally that the notion of civility and respect is sometimes used by people to draw the boundaries of what can be said in public. And I actually think that it's not a productive norm generally, and it's also not a productive norm for a college campus. Let me give you an example. If I'm expecting respectful behavior, right, even in my classroom, right, where surely I need to set up norms. I mean, I just said that. I do think that I need to be clear about whether you can shout out your answers, or you need to raise your hand, or, what kind of responses to each other students are expected to have, or whatever it might be, right? If I'm demanding respectful behavior, and this is my one norm that I'm calling for, then basically people can come in and they can look very respectful, and they can speak in proper tones, and they can say pretty terrible things, right? I mean, so they can actually express hateful views in a form that is very respectful, right? And so then if I want to respond to them, if my feelings are hurt, if I'm raising my voice and I'm saying, listen, this is not something that I'm willing to accept, now I'm on the wrong side, right? So they are voicing hateful views, but I wasn't being respectful, right? So I actually think this is both limiting too much and too little. It's limiting emotional, strong responses, and it's not limiting hateful views, right? And so I think respect is not a good guide for us. More specifically about the forms of expression that are very unfortunate that people can express, on the public spaces on your campus and my campus. professing supposedly religious views or their interpretation of their religion. The problem with that is really not so much respect. I think the problem with that is that they are voicing views that are exclusionary, that are supportive of a sense of supremacy of a certain group, certain religious group, or certain interpretation over others, and that they are looking to, nominally, they are looking to convince you to join their religious perspective. But actually, their tactics are not intent on persuasion. What they are trying to do is that they are trying to goad you, their listeners, right? They are trying to actually get you to be mad. They're trying to enrage you, right? And sometimes what they are looking to do is to create a rift, to create a challenge, to create a disagreement within your community, to push you to the boundary, right? Using extreme language. So it's worse than disrespectful. It's really extreme language, hateful language. And I really think that once you recognize that this is not an effort to engage in a dialogue, this is not a conversation that we are having, oh, please pardon the language for a second, right? Just quoting some things that they say. Oh, are all women dressed in this way? Are they really sluts, as they sometimes say, or whatever terrible things that they say about on my campus about Jews or about Muslims or people that they recognize as racial minorities or who they think are gay, right? What are they trying to do? They're not trying to persuade you. They are trying to enrage you. If you are not having this emotional response, you win, right? So there's a way in which you can use your inattention, or you can use your humor, or you can use your talents in other ways, singing, affirming each other. If you are maintaining your own community as a positive environment, that's your win. This is not about persuasion, right? It's about eliciting negative emotions. If you manage to maintain your positive emotions, right, then you have the upper hand, which I actually think this is kind of a challenge. And I think this is a more appropriate response. I'm happy to also talk about some things in the classroom, which I was asked about this morning, but I really want to see if people in the room right now want to
I think, Arthur, I think you came off of mute, so I wasn't sure if you had a question. I know we have a question in the chat as well. Sorry, you're still muted. Yep.
Were you speaking to me?
Yes. Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Oh, actually, I think I was almost going to, it was strange. I was going to pretty much comment on the misogynistic Jesus people against gays and lesbians that appear on this campus, and note that I think one of the worst things we can do is protest against them. I think last year, or the last time they appeared on campus, I was so pleased to see most people just plain ignore them. And so they were just talking to the trees. And I think in a lot of cases, we've had people that I considered pretty hateful on campus. Once in Kendall Hall, the person was talking about stuff that I would say 95% of the students disagreed with, and yet they went to hear her. And they protested her, and in so doing, they kind of validated her and validated her importance, where it would have been so much better if just nobody had gone, I think.
So I really appreciate this comment, and I would actually offer the following. I generally agree that there is a certain type of speaker that is best ignored, just like you said, Arthur. And this is a person who is not coming to engage in dialogue and is actually coming oftentimes to try and make a buck. I mean, they are trying to get some money out of your anger. What is the money that they get? Maybe they show their supporters video of you all getting mad about their words, and this is how they generate donations. Sometimes they are coming to sell their book or to get paid for their speeches by showing that they get the people on college campuses mad. I mean, so sometimes speakers really are not coming to engage with you. They are coming to exploit your attention for their own financial gain, right? And so if you don't give them your attention, I think you're doing better, as Arthur was just saying. However, I do want to limit that a little bit, or to just have a caveat here, which is that sometimes we have speakers with views that are very different from our own, and they come to speak on campus because somebody invited them, or they are speaking in a public context. And, you know, sometimes it's beneficial to listen. So not if it's hateful or just looking to harm you, or not if it's grift in the ways that we just now, Arthur and then myself, agreed on. But sometimes they are just raising very different perspectives. And who knows, you can listen to that. And maybe, I'm not saying that you need to be persuaded, but maybe, for example, it clarifies something in your mind. What is it about this that I disagree with? Why is my position different? I never thought about this because my friends think like me about this issue, right? Here is a person with a different view. I don't know, let me just think. I think it's really wrong, but why? Right? So there could be something clarifying for you, even if you're not persuaded, if you listen to somebody who has different opinions. But the point really has to be that this person is coming in for a dialogue. They want to hear your thoughts. They want to engage with you. If they're just coming to benefit from your anger, don't give them the pleasure of this benefit.
Another question in the chat is, do you think that public universities and colleges have a higher obligation for free speech compared to private institutions?
Great, that's a great question. So I will say that this is not even a matter of perspective only. I would say that, first of all, legally speaking, public institutions have a stronger responsibility to protect open expression than private institutions. So I'll say 2 sentences about why, and then I'll take it back, okay? So public institutions are seen by the courts as an arm of the government, right? So you guys are the government. The leadership of the institution is seen as the government for the purpose of protecting speech. And so when we say that we cannot make laws that abridge the freedom of expression and association, etc., it's not only just Congress that cannot make these laws and regulations, it's also public institutions, right? And so public institutions are representing the government for the purpose of protecting speech. By contrary, private institutions do not represent the government. They are more just like a private business. And so they, for this purpose, and so they can decide, you know, I want to do this and I don't want to do that, right? So I'll give you an extreme example for the purpose of taking it back, right? Let's say that Penn decides, Penn is a private institution. Let's say that we decide from now on we're only inviting male speakers. Women are, you know, boring and not as smart. We're only just wanting to hear male speakers. Okay, so a public institution is not allowed to do that, but a private institution can decide to do that, right? Now, of course, this clarifies for you that it would be a very silly decision to make, right? And in fact, higher education institutions, in my view, really have to be all on the same page we have to operate similarly in terms of protecting open expression, because we have the same mission in the ways that I tried to explain in my presentation, right? Given that we all really are, our mission really is similar and is similarly advanced by free inquiry and open dialogue and inclusive climate. We all need that. Now, sometimes we're going to make it work in different ways, right? Depending on our population and our location and our size and our preferences. I mean, there are all sorts of considerations, right? But private and public institutions are different in their governance structure, but they're not different in their mission. And so really we have to protect speech in the same way. My only caveat to that is that public institutions sometimes will have no choice but to permit truly hateful speakers on their campuses because they don't have the legal tools to stop them. And if private institutions do have the tools to stop the same speaker, I think they should, right? So, but this is really in a very marginal, extreme cases where we have seen in the recent years, neo-Nazi speakers, for example, renting spaces on public college and university campuses and giving talks that are truly hateful. Public universities, including Penn State, including University of Florida and others, went to court trying to block these speakers, but the court said, no, you're a public institution, you're an arm of the government, so you cannot really limit speech based on its content. You have to stay neutral. And so they had to still take these speakers, which was rather unfortunate. And this is the only case where I'd say private institutions should pull the private card and not permit these people. The publics would have wanted to do the same, right? But other than that, we really don't have the same legal boundaries, but we should operate in the same way.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you protect the dignity of all populations on campus, especially minority populations, when speech can be curtailed to protect the dignity of minority individuals or groups, and how can it be curtailed?
I mean, this really is the most pressing question in this regard. That's my view, right? Because, for example, speech that is racist or otherwise expressing bigotry, exclusion, supremacy, etc., of certain groups over others, whether it's going to be racial groups, religious groups, gender and sexuality, etc. These forms of expression are protected by the First Amendment. They are protected by the courts, but they do create an exclusion on campus, right? So if somebody is repeatedly telling me immigrants don't belong here, then as an immigrant, you know, of course, I know that this is a protected form of speech, but I probably will find myself, you know, looking to hide in the corner, right? Not wanting to stand out. Maybe if I don't speak and people don't hear my accent, then I can pass or something. And then, of course, other people don't have the same benefit when we're talking about other minority groups. So what I would say to that is that given that there is no way for us to block hateful expression that is exclusionary in these ways, there is no legal way that we can do that. And given that actually, even if there was a legal way to silence hatred and bigoted speech, I would be a little bit worried about doing that, because I would worry that people would still be going around being racist, you know, in their minds, or being otherwise bigoted and never expressing it, just festering with it and enacting it in various ways. right? That would be a worry for me. I'm not saying that dialogue fixes that, but I'm saying silencing doesn't fix it either. It lulls us into a sense of confidence. Oh, nobody's saying anything hateful. Maybe it's all fixed and corrected, right? Given that we cannot limit hateful speech in legal ways, I think the next best option that we have is to ensure that the costs of hate and hateful speech is not borne by the people who are facing it, right? So in other words, if you are seeing racist speech, it should not only be the responsibility and the cost being placed on racial minorities. If you are seeing anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim or other speech, the institution where this is happening needs to carry at least a good amount of the burden, because it's the institution that is permitting and protecting this speech. It's its legal responsibility. And so it needs to develop other mechanisms for carrying this burden. For example, it needs to support identity-based student groups and their activities and expression. It needs to support, for example, speakers, visitors, events, and other things that would reflect the institution's commitment to inclusion in the face of exclusionary and hate-based speech. It needs to sponsor different contexts where we can have better speech, right, be voiced. And in these and other ways, it needs to really reflect in practice its commitment to inclusion. Inclusion and diversity cannot end, as you all know, in the admissions office, right? It's not enough to admit a diverse class. You have to, as an institution, and I know that you do, support a diverse campus population. And as such, it's the responsibility of the institution to make sure that hateful speech doesn't remain unanswered, even as we are committed to open expression and continue protecting it.
Thank you. So the next question actually deals with a conversation that we had this morning as well in regards to the mass email notifications to students or to the population when particular groups are on campus. So could you talk a little bit about, I guess, the balance of that, knowing that, you know, as an institution, sometimes we're under pressure from students and their parents to alert them when they're on campus. But then I know that you talked this morning about how that kind of highlights the group and really leans into what they're trying to spread. So can you talk a little bit about your opinion in relation to those notifications?
Great, thank you. So I'll start off by just recognizing that, of course, in this regard and others, different campuses have different needs. So for example, on my campus, when these groups are coming, we estimate that about 5 to 10% of the student population is exposed to them. It's a large number, but it's still a small share, right? And so for us, if we send a campus-wide notification, we are amplifying the hateful views of this group. We are drawing more students and more members of our community to be exposed to that, either through coming to see or just even through the email, and who otherwise would not have been exposed, right? So on other campuses, and I know Towson and other ones, you know, are experiencing it very differently, where a large share of their students are going to be exposed anyways, right? So that's a different circumstance in terms of notification. In my view, generally, campus-wide notification is, in my perspective, too blunt a tool in response, right? So in other words, it's really spreading the word to too many people who otherwise would not be affected or exposed to these hateful views that these groups are expressing. And so I think it's better to have a targeted notification. For example, if you have a specific groups, let's say, for example, that this is a group that's hateful towards LGBTQ folks, maybe the LGBTQ center would like to be notified in case people prefer to avoid the area, for instance, or so they can tell you about that and you can decide to notify them. And of course, as we were talking this morning, it's surely effective, and this is something we also do on our campus and in many others. It's effective to have a chain of command, sort of like, or a phone tree, what used to be called, right, where you send the notification to people who have the relevant authority and capacity to respond. So if you have student groups that are hoping to, in an organized fashion, offer alternative programming so that people can draw their attention away from the hateful expression and towards a more loving or more musical or more humorous or more joyful activity and connection, then these groups of course need to be notified as well. And on our campus, we also notify the open expression observers who are making sure that everyone's rights is protected in this area. But of course, this can be taken care of also by your care team or by your student services team, the bias team, etc.
So I know we are kind of at time, so I wanted to give everyone a chance to first thank you so much for presenting to the group. And I know that you had also offered to stay on for a few extra minutes if people had questions. So I want to be mindful of time, as I know students might have classes or faculty might need to get back to teaching or meetings. But if you're still willing, we'd I guess love to keep the Zoom open for anybody that wants to stay for a few extra minutes and have any other open discussions or ask questions. But thank you to everyone for attending, and especially thank you to Dr. Ben-Porath for speaking to us today.
Thank you so much to Keith and Jordan and everyone in attendance. I'll stick around, and if you want, you can even move us back to gallery view. And then if people are staying and they want to just have a conversation, I'm happy to do that. But really, thank you so much to everyone who attended today.
Give a little bit of time, see if anybody wants to hang out. Hi, Carla, did you have a question?
I just have like a sort of comment, because lately, like, I, as a student at TCNJ, I have been thinking about like when I should speak or if I should respond to somebody with an opinion of mine, and sometimes I get a little stressed over that. But I really appreciate what you had to say about this topic, and I hope that TCNJ can utilize some of your methods so that we can have a more open and honest and discussion about this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. I really appreciate it. And I just want you to sort of like keep in your mind the way that I always try to remind all of my students that, if they were only coming to college for things that they can find on Google, it's too bad to pay the tuition for that, right? I mean, most of what we can get out of college is hearing each other and just engaging with each other. And so when you are speaking up and sharing your opinions, even when they are different from other people's, then really you are supporting them and you are giving them the gift of reconsidering their own views, right? And so this is definitely something that I think is advisable to always try and do, even though I'm just saying, I know it's hard sometimes. So, but it's definitely something that I think you can think of mostly as a gift that you are giving, right? The gift of your voice. So
Yes.
thank you so much for coming today, Carla.
Thank you.
And Carla, if you're interested in this topic, we can invite you to, we have a team of students, faculty, and staff that kind of talk about this a little bit more in depth and are kind of alerted when we know certain groups are coming on campus to help facilitate conversations around this. So if that's an area of interest, I'll send you an email, give you some information, and you can let Takis and I know if you'd be interested in that.
All right. Should I contact you through email or?
I'll send you, we'll send you an email.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of
Have a
course.
good day.
Ooh.
Everybody else just hanging out?
I guess, right?
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting talk. I guess I do wonder about like certain topics where I guess dignity is the kind of question. One comes to mind probably would be the abortion argument, where both sides are questioning dignity of a person in a way, and the whole argument is about the level of dignity, you know?
Right. I mean, this is surely one of the areas actually where when we ask people whether they can think about something they completely disagree with, but they can understand the other side, this is the one topic that always comes up, right, in surveys and also in dialogues, right? So this is an area where some people say, I'm entirely against abortions because I see this as a matter of human life. Or the next person can say, I'm entirely for a woman's right to choose because I see this as a matter of autonomy on her own body and life. And people on both sides, even where they vehemently disagree with each other's conclusions, they actually really do understand the other's argument and perspective. So actually, Vincent, even though it's a really difficult topic, and I don't know that it can be resolved, even in the public sphere, it's a good topic to start with because it's one place where you can say, I disagree with you. I'm not going to be persuaded by your views, but I really don't think you're a bad person, right? I don't think you have bad motivations. I can understand where you're coming from. I'm coming from a different place. Right. And so it's actually a really good platform for starting a conversation. Not necessarily for persuasion, but just for an exchange and understanding.
Yeah. I also just say theology might be one of those, because you kind of mentioned like everyone saying how, well, when it comes to like theology, you really can only have, I guess, one right answer, and everyone thinks they have the right answer, at least for most theological principles. So when I guess you have that kind of debate,
right,
you kind of inherently have to say, I am correct in this. A person's not going to be like Muslim or Catholic or Lutheran because they think they're that because they're right,
Right, for sure. Yeah, and this is one place where there is just, it's what the philosophers call is incommensurable, right? There is just no way of reconciling differences, but that doesn't mean that we cannot figure out ways to live together, as a community. And that's the main point, right? The main point is not persuasion, it's shared spaces and shared context and understanding, right? A shared dialogue.
Yeah. I guess that could be level of civil disagreement,
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the training this morning, and then definitely the conversation this afternoon. I think we had at one point 83 or 84. So we were a little nervous, so I'm glad people showed up on a Friday afternoon to
Yeah.
have this conversation. But again, thank you so much. To Keith and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate everybody, coming together, and I appreciate the invitation. Again, I really enjoyed this whole day.